Since time immemorial, people have wondered where they come from, where they're going, and who they are. Humankind has reinvented the world again and again, always believing in the possibility of a better future. 500 years ago, Martin Luther started the Reformation, transforming the way people worshipped and thought. Today, we're standing at another crossroads.
I think it's more about changing culture for me and making sure that by the time those changes do come around, we have the resources to make sure we have a fair and equal world for as many people as possible.
The more we know, the more we understand, the more we understand one another. And that's the important thing.
I don't see it that way. I don't think knowledge is enough. If we invested more time, not in adding to our knowledge, but rather in exploring our conscience, there would be far less suffering in the world.
In our new online era, human knowledge multiplies at a rapid pace. Luther's translation of the Bible was a first step. It made the Word of God accessible to anyone who could read. Globalization has shown us that the world is not that big. It's helped us to see the world's population as a community. A basic principle of democracy is that everyone deserves the same rights and opportunities. What can we do to ensure this principle is upheld in the future? Are all humans equal? In the 18th century, philosophers and revolutionaries started calling for equal rights and freedom of expression. They fought for these principles, and some even died in the process. Today, there's more diversity of opinion than ever before, and thanks to the internet, these opinions are disseminated all over the world.
Love, justice, charity, all of those concepts are entirely fictional. They're made up. And that is the role of writers and thinkers today, and artists and politicians. You know, all of these things are stories that we tell ourselves in order to become better. And just because they're stories doesn't mean they're not valid and true and real.
300 years ago, the dark clouds over Europe began to disperse. The wars of religion were over, at least for the time being. Against the backdrop of the new spirit of optimism, people contemplated the future and began to ask, what is man? What is his purpose? The Age of Enlightenment had dawned. Philosophers such as Rousseau and Kant contemplated the nature of reason. They believed all men deserved to be treated as equals. Vast libraries were founded, places where all the world's knowledge was collected and stored. People celebrated freedom of thought, but in their daily lives, they were still ruled by the aristocracy and the church. Social and political upheaval eventually led to the French Revolution.
Just imagine if people only did what's right, not what they are forced to do. We'd be living in a very different world.
One evening, the playwright Gotthold Ephraim was on his way home from the theater. Theater had become increasingly popular during the Enlightenment. It was a way of spreading ideas among the masses. Lessing loved wine and gambling, but he wasn't very lucky and had heavy debts.
And this was wonderful. Oh, David Grover is a fantastic theorist. Oh, this is the one Jess likes. Look. I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have novels to read and stories to tell. And I think I've had nightmares where I've read all the novels. You know, I've read them all.
Is the ability to read and write a blessing or a curse? For Laurie Penny, it's an addiction.
Now, I can't imagine what it must have been like to live in, you know, in the 14th century, where even if you could read, there were only a few books. You know, you could actually finish it all. You could finish all the books, and then what would you do?
Reading too much can be lonely. When she was 17, Laurie Penny was treated in hospital for anorexia. These days, her motto is, don't diet, riot.
I don't think the job of fiction, and even of utopian fiction, is to show how the future should be. I don't think that's anyone's job, even a political writer. There we go. Fiction allows us an opportunity to imagine different and better worlds, or to imagine how we'll cope with changes in society. And I think fiction can get to truths that even journalism can't.
My passion, the theatre. My obsession, books. Books help me see the world more clearly, and in terms of tolerance and charity, open my eyes.
A seminal playwright of the Enlightenment, Lessing was famous across Germany. He created female characters such as Minna von Barnhelm and Emilia Galotti, who fought with their hearts and minds for equality and against the privileges of the aristocracy. Ethical duty was a guiding principle of the Enlightenment. Lessing wanted to be able to live from his earnings as a writer. He didn't want a steady job. He wanted to be free to speak his mind. For a long time, he nursed a plan to write a play about hostility between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. It would be a plea for tolerance and social harmony.
Lessing was one of the greatest representatives of the Enlightenment era. He broke down religious barriers and propagated tolerance. Specifically, tolerance towards those that Luther had discriminated against, Muslims and Jews. Those were the groups who achieved full recognition and respect in Lessing's works.
Luther feared nothing more than Satan. He hated Islam and Judaism because these religions did not see God the way he did. His intolerance was a result of his limited horizons.
If we are to make the most of our intellect, we must learn to think with our hearts. At heart, all men are the same.
We use research, the latest Google glasses, the internet, new studies, science and mathematics to try to see the world. But we'll never see it properly as long as we ignore our hearts. When we've been overdoing the thinking, we should pay more attention to our hearts. More heart, less head, as it were.
Throughout history, mankind has sought to build up a universal encyclopedia of knowledge. That's something we've always dreamed of.
Da haben wir das Internet.
Today, we have the internet. So we believe this dream can come true. But we have to make sure the individual doesn't drown in this vast amount of knowledge. How should we cope with it? We have ever more knowledge at our disposal, but do we actually know more? And what do we do with it all? That's a whole different matter.
"200 years before the Enlightenment, Martin Luther translated the Bible into German in Wartburg Castle. One message of the Reformation was that everyone should learn to read, so they could find their own path to God. Faith made everyone equal and free. Luther helped pave the way for the values of the Enlightenment.
People, learn to read and write. Read the Bible. It's not the preserve of the priests. Every single Christian has a right, if not a duty, to read the Bible. It's amazing to think about what Luther unleashed. By the 1800s, all the leading intellectual figures, from Goethe and Schiller to Hölderlin and Schlegel, were Protestant. Luther's exhortations unleashed extraordinary productivity.
These days, apps and social media give everyone a platform where they can be heard. Marie Gouges arrived in Paris almost 250 years ago. She was young and illiterate, but she taught herself to read and write.
Minor concerns annoy me, but serious problems make me calm and courageous. No one knows me the way I know myself, my strengths, my weaknesses.
Marie Gouges had been forced to marry a much older man. Her father and her husband were her legal guardians. All women at the time had male guardians. Marie fled to Paris. A woman who left a marriage was punished with a jail sentence, whereas a man who left his wife merely had to pay a fine.
Mademoiselle Marie.
Mademoiselle Marie.
Give me some more of your true art.
All men are born equal, free to strive for happiness. Why does the same not apply to women and to slaves?
The cornerstone of the Enlightenment was the principle that all men are born equal. With its class, religious, and racial distinctions, it's society that creates inequality. Society turns people born free into prisoners.
Society has forced us to take on a mask, but that in fact, below the masks, there is a true human being who is authentic and whose voice has been muffled by society.
Our lives today as free, autonomous individuals would be unthinkable without the Enlightenment and without the work of trailblazers such as Lessing. His work is an attempt to recast man as a being with a heart and a mind.
So that's a conception of the individual as standing naked in front of society and telling society, my nakedness is more valuable, is more important, is more authentic than all the artifices that society has built.
Another pioneer of this new philosophy was mathematician Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz. He was appointed to the court of the House of Brunswick in Hanover. There he would often accompany the young princess Sophie Charlotte on a stroll through the palace grounds.
Everything seems different, yet the same. There is no such thing as coincidence. Everything is connected. Everything was created according to a divine plan.
Alles ist nach einem geheimen Plan Gottes geschaffen.
Look at this, Serene Highness. There is no such thing as chaos. even if it seems as though there is, when the wind blows through the lemon trees and ruffles our thoughts.
Professor Leibniz, sometimes your musings ruffle my thoughts.
Leibniz believed in God's infinite wisdom, that God made man rational so he would make the world a better place. Man alone can bring order to chaos. This was what freedom meant.
Freedom is a big word. I still haven't really gotten my head around it. I've never even Googled it. I know that freedom to choose can sometimes feel quite challenging. Since I've put my job on hold, I can decide myself what to do with my time.
Bo Le-Mentzel has given up his job as an architect and now devotes himself to making the world a better place.
I sent an email to my former company. I loaned them my furniture, and now we're off to pick it up because I need it for a project.
Bo has designed a range of affordable, do-it-yourself furniture. He's a guest lecturer at the University of Fine Arts in Hamburg. He gives his salary to his students.
I would like to work for no gain and think for no gain. So I asked my Facebook friends if they felt like financing my life. Believe it or not, there were about 200 or so crazy people who agreed. They just gave me money, no strings attached. They don't expect anything in return. That's what's revolutionary.
These days, a lot of major companies seek out his services as an inspirational speaker.
A textiles company just sent me an email asking if I'd like to hold a talk there. I'm not really interested. But I always ask my Facebook friends what they think. I've just posted it.
The digital world celebrates the individual as a rational thinker and a pleasure seeker. But online, we're constantly looking to build communities.
Imagine that we are like diamonds, each of us. We have so many sides. And every time culture changes, one side gets under the light. In modernity, with, say, Newton or all the big sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, we started looking at ourselves as mechanisms, as biological mechanisms. And that was the side of the diamond we concentrated on. And then our culture changed, and all of a sudden, oh, we look at ourselves as informational organisms.
When I awake, my head is so full of ideas that there isn't enough time in the day to write them all down. Often I don't know what I should do first.
Leibniz never asked himself if he should work or not. He worked constantly. He would remain at the court of the House of Brunswick for some 40 years. He lived in a well-appointed home on the town's most elegant square. His job was to document the history of the Guelph dynasty and rearrange the royal library according to a new system. But he needed more intellectual stimulation. Leibniz was looking for nothing less than mathematical proof that God exists. One sunny day, he was struck by the play of light and shadow and had an epiphany. Was God giving him a sign?
Just imagine, there are only two numbers, 1 and 0. Just two numbers, 1 and 0. These are not merely mathematical figures, but symbols of the world. 0 represents nothing, and 1 represents everything else, the creation of all things by God. Ergo, all we need to create everything from nothing is 1. Without God, there is nothing. I will call this brilliant discovery the binary system.
Das duale System der Schöpfung.
Leibniz shed new light on the world. The binary system is everywhere and inescapable. Rich and poor, reason and faith, life and death.
We can make a difference, even with small steps. We're all part of a system. We all have to play our part. I believe that even a small gesture can have a far-reaching effect.
Lessing was relieved when he landed a secure job as a librarian in the sleepy town of Wolfenbüttel. The famous Herzog August Library had a vast collection of books from all over the world. For years, Lessing had been engaged to be married to a widow called Eva König. But they rarely saw one another. Eva lived in Vienna, where she was trying to secure the estate of her late husband, a wealthy merchant. When Lessing was given a salary raise, he finally married Eva, and she moved to Wolfenbüttel to join him.
Attack is the best defense.
But that doesn't mean you'll win. A toast to a brave poet who dares to trade his desk for real life and love.
I like the town's history. It was sort of seen as this den of sin. There were lots of gangs operating around here. It's always been seen as a bit seedy, even though it's posh now, and I think there's still that element, that sort of shady seaside, slight naughtiness.
In the 19th century, the upper classes would spend their holidays in Brighton on the southeast coast of England. Laurie Penny went to school there.
Since I was a kid, I have been really moved by any time I perceive something to be unfair or somebody to be worse off just because somebody had decided that they should be. And that's something that my whole family shares, and I guess that's one of the things that makes me a journalist. And that's how I think of feminism and social justice right now. It's a fight to make the world fairer and kinder. Does that make sense?
Laurie has published a number of best-selling books about sex, gender, power, and capitalism. Her blog, Penny Read, has scooped a range of prizes. Marie Gouges, after she had taught herself how to read and write, took the name Olympe de Gouges. In the 1780s, she began publishing plays and also wrote a scandalous semi-autobiographical novel.
My friends warn me. I'm living dangerously. I should only open my mouth when I'm in safe company. But I call a cat and a scoundrel a scoundrel. And I will continue to rail against injustice when I want to. I'm no longer your whore.
Marie couldn't live from her earnings as a writer. Did Olympe de Gouges sell her body? as many women in the French capital were forced to do. She was rumored to be the mistress of several aristocratic gentlemen, and she was often called the most beautiful woman in Paris. Who would have guessed that 250 years later, she would be celebrated as one of the world's earliest feminists? Marie, alias Olympe, campaigned for a woman's right to choose her own husband and her right to sleep with a man before marriage. In the eyes of the church and state, that made her dangerous.
For me, a relationship is two or more people who are able to improve each other's lives and care for each other. I'm bisexual and polyamorous, and I have had many different partners, and sometimes at the same time, and I think there are lots and lots of ways you can build community and relationships that aren't the traditional model. Experimenting with that is one of the things I see a lot of young people doing right now.
As you know, I have published a new book. Men tend to think in terms of essentials, whereas women have a greater aesthetic sense. The best of all possible worlds.
In his new book, Theodicy, Leibniz defended God against the Enlightenment idea that his creation was flawed because it permits evil, suffering, and injustice. In the book, he coined the phrase, the best of all possible worlds. Since God is good and omnipotent, he argued, and since he chose this world out of all possibilities, this world must be good.
But why is there evil in the world? You say God made the universe the best of all possible worlds. So why does he allow suffering?
I believe there's something small inside us all, only this big perhaps. It's like a genie. We all have a genie inside us. It's there the minute we're born. If you cultivate your relationship with your inner genie, it's a lot of fun. The class for refugees, German for Arabic-speaking refugees, is it at 4?
Van Bo found out where a trade fair was being dismantled. The cardboard furniture is perfect for his new project.
This is the first time I'm trying out the idea of the open school here in Berlin, in my own neighborhood. I live around the corner. I love this park. I come here with my family. I'm trying to network the neighborhood's potential. Hey, we've set up a school. That school is you. We call it the Open School. Open School means that everyone is welcome. Everyone can come here to learn, and everyone can contribute.
There are no separate classes in Van Bo's open-air school. It doesn't matter where people come from or what religion they belong to. It's an experiment, very much in the spirit of the Enlightenment.
It's so much fun. It's not so much about envisioning a future as actually building it. Anyone can do it. Anyone can build the future the way they want, right now.
Leibniz had a lot on his plate. A brilliant networker, he corresponded daily with many of the leading scholars and statesmen of his time. But he eventually found himself overwhelmed by the flood of ideas and papers and succumbed to chaos. Today we all struggle to keep up with the constant flow of information. Dictionaries and encyclopedias are out of date as soon as they're published. Now everyone and anyone can keep renewing and adding to our knowledge.
So that is one of the roles that Wikipedia plays in our culture today. If you go into a search engine and you type Queen Victoria, you probably get millions and millions of web pages back, but what you probably want is just a basic summary. You need to organize all that information, get oriented, get the basic background, and have sources and references so you can dig deeper and learn further in more detailed works as necessary.
Lessing's only child was born on Christmas Eve, 1777. His son lived less than a day. His wife, Eva, barely survived childbirth, dying 2 weeks later.
If I could buy happiness with half my remaining days and spend the other half in the company of this woman, there is nothing I would rather do. But that is not to be. My will to live has been extinguished. With every line I write, I am so afraid that I begin to sweat and I lose my train of thought.
Laurie Penny is on a reading tour of Germany, where she has many fans.
My job is to be one of the people who makes sure that when it all comes down, we're decent to each other and we're living in a more equal and fairer society, and the apocalypse doesn't roll back the clock on human progress. And we have to find a different way of living, even if the world changes and becomes harder.
Laurie has something rare to offer people, a sense of direction. She explains how gender equality affects all aspects of life, including the economy.
What would make the biggest difference is to destroy both the system of international borders and the money system. So you would have no borders and a universal basic income for everybody. I think that's a good place to start.
In the late 18th century, the French state was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Vast sums of money were being spent on Versailles. The common people were starving and increasingly unwilling to see their taxes wasted on luxuries by the aristocracy and the clergy. The Third Estate, which represented the majority of the people, rose up and demanded a constitution and equality before the law. The storming of the Bastille on the 14th of July, 1789, marked the start of the French Revolution.
It was such a radical new departure in social terms, a challenge to the aristocracy and the clergy. It was the end of something that had previously been incontestable. Luther never contested it. Before the 18th century, no one had ever challenged the ruler, the aristocracy.
The French Republic was born. A new National Assembly issued a declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen. Olympe de Gouges was among those inspired by the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But she rejected the death penalty for the king, which put her own life at risk. When Louis XVI was arrested, a wave of terror was unleashed. Tens of thousands were guillotined. Robespierre and his supporters were ruthless.
People are born free and equal. They will use the revolution for their own purposes and demand freedom only for themselves.
The king is an enemy of the people, and his head will roll. I am your friend. I wouldn't like to see your pretty head separated from your pretty neck. They say you are a traitor. Do you sincerely believe you can demand your own freedom at the cost of the revolution?
It is the century of the Enlightenment and reason, but men seek to rule despotically over a sex that is in full possession of all intellectual abilities.
I don't want men in suits ordering me around when the apocalypse hits. I want a committee of mums, whatever gender they are. I want those people in charge who I saw. I want moms. I want older gay guys who are maybe able to calm everyone down. I want queer people. I want people who aren't so wedded to traditional models of power and can just get things done.
For me, that's part of it. That's their beauty.
With their protests against bread shortages, women helped bring about the French Revolution. But now they were being excluded from the fashioning of a new social and political order. Marie Gouges took it upon herself to write a declaration on the rights of women. But it was still at the printers when the National Assembly approved the Constitution, which made no mention of women's rights.
Is it not the case that the tyranny of men is similar to the tyranny of the monarchy before the revolution? As long as men and women are not equal, there will be no end to despotism. Article 1. Woman is born free and remains equal to a man in rights. Article 10. Woman has the right to mount the scaffold, so she must equally have the right to mount the rostrum.
I hope it was okay. Thanks. Life for women in particular today is incredibly stressful, with outside pressures, economic pressures, and pressures to be everything. The idea that women can have it all has turned into this duty that we have to do everything and be everything.
Lessing had always been free to publish his plays and pamphlets. But all of a sudden, he fell into disfavor. His mistake was to have challenged that the Bible was the source of all truth, and argued that the practice of faith was possible even without Scripture. For that, the Lutheran Orthodoxy branded him an enemy.
They say I am the Antichrist because I have called for a natural religion and rejected the absolute authority of the Bible. They say it is political insurrection because I argue that it is the heart that proves God's existence. They say they will not tolerate me making religion look ridiculous and contemptible.
Lessing believed that the human heart and mind were more important than the written word, and was a staunch defender of freedom of thought. In 1779, he published the play Nathan the Wise. The play is a plea for religious tolerance between Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, illustrated by a parable about 3 identical rings.
Scarce was the father dead when each son comes and brings his ring, and each would of the house be lord. They search, they quarrel, they accuse. In vain the right ring could not now be proved.
Fast so unerweislich wie uns ist der rechte Glaube.
Wie, das soll die Antwort auf meine Frage sein.
At the heart of Nathan the Wise is the idea of brotherhood among mankind. For over 200 years, it's been one of the most performed plays on the German stage.
Kraft des Steins in seinen Ring an Tag zu legen, komm mit dieser Kraft.
A large and encompassing tolerance goes beyond respect, but includes respect. Tolerance means respecting the beliefs of others and endeavoring to understand them. That's an extraordinarily important legacy, one that is infinitely constructive if its lesson is applied.
wenn man es denn richtig anwendet.
6 months after the king was executed, Marie Gouges was arrested for distributing pamphlets calling for a plebiscite to allow citizens to choose their form of government. She was jailed in the Conciergerie, where prisoners during the French Revolution were taken before being guillotined.
I'm not afraid. I demand you be held to account for your cruelty. Article 11 says the free communication of ideas and of opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Does this mean that these laws and rights, the entire Constitution, are just empty words?
On the 3rd of November 1793, Marie Gouges was guillotined on the Place de la Concorde, where Marie Antoinette had been executed just 2 weeks earlier.
Despite everything, my female mind has sown the seed of new ideas. These will grow and bear fruit, fruit that nature has designed and which no male hand can improve on.
Marie Gouges' demand that women must be equal to men and have the same rights before the law would not be adopted into European constitutions until the 20th century.
The question of whether more women leaders would change the world, that it's not just about gender shift, it's about attitude shift. Women make up half the population. If you're not drawing from that half the population, then your leaders will be worse. That's just logical.
The equality of all people, regardless of origin, remains an elusive dream.
It's up to us to bring about change. Fortunately, there will always be people who get up and fight against injustice.
Instead, they come to the House of Surrender where there is a perpetual late spring. The town and its 100,000 happy folk are walking.